B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins News and Comment. It's Friday, August 17th, 2018. Your humble host is fresh back from vacation. And we'll alert you about some changes here at the Secret Studio that are going to affect my podcast schedule up through Labor Day. And also, I'll give you a little travelogue update on my vacation to Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine at the end of this podcast. But our lead story today is about how Donald Trump is channeling Tricky Dick Nixon. And as you may know, I cut my teeth. I developed my chops as a young talk show host in Chicago on radio station WDAI-FM, where I covered the Nixon-Watergate scandal that led to his near impeachment and his resignation in the face of being ousted by the Congress. And one of the big crimes that Nixon was accused of was creating an enemies list and then using the power of government to illegally and unfairly extract penalties from political opponents. And that enemies list was somewhat extensive. And a man I got to know after he retired from the Washington Post, journalist Julius Douchet, would always introduce himself as a proud member of Nixon's enemies list. And he's proud because Nixon never actually cracked down on Julius or his colleagues, but he certainly wanted to. And I see echoes of this in Trump's bullying tactic. Apparently, somebody recently told him, hey, did you know that you could take away John Brennan's security clearance and the other spooks who have lined up to criticize you, who appear to be the ringleaders of the Russiagate narrative? And so Trump is taking these easy potshots. Now, to be fair, Trump has the power to grant and to cancel security clearances, and he doesn't really need a reason. But there's a process for people who violate the terms of a security clearance. And Trump has not initiated that. He's not accusing John Brennan of violating his commitment to keep secrets secret. So this is pure political malevolence. It is ugly, it's bare-knuckled, and I'm deeply opposed to it. I'm equally opposed to the way many people are rewriting history and turning John Brennan into some sort of a hero, the man who is speaking truth to power, standing for our constitutional rights after he spent most of his career undermining the Constitution and many aspects of our government. And I've linked to a powerful piece written by Branko Marcetic at Jacobin Magazine, jacobinmag.com. And he writes under the headline, From Criminals to Heroes, and he does a great recap of the real history, not only of John Brennan, but also his buddy James Clapper, who was most recently Obama's Director of National Intelligence, and Mike Hayden, the double spook who ran the NSA before he ran the CIA. And all three of those guys have been out in the media. Some of them have contracts to be commentators, like Brennan does with NBC and the MSNBC cable news channel. And so, while I don't agree with the motive that Trump has used here, and I don't agree with this kind of payback, it's fair to say that these are people who have been causing a lot of problems for Donald Trump. And whether you agree with the Russiagate narrative or not, they have been actively feeding the media. I see them as the primary leakers, the main anonymous sources that have driven the media malpractice that fuels the Russiagate telenovela. And so, for example, Marcetic here says, as liberals have fallen in love all over again with the intelligence agencies they previously distrusted, the left has cringed. And I am cringing. My Facebook feed is littered with people who are proclaiming that John Brennan, because he's against Trump, is therefore, without any further examination, a national hero. Marchetti says before Trump's election, provided the opportunity for Brennan to rebrand. He was best known for his role in the CIA's covert spying operation against the Senate staffers who had compiled the report on CIA torture. That was a huge constitutional crisis. And John Brennan was at the center of it. And it led even Dianne Feinstein, my senior senator from California, a leading apologist for the intelligence community on virtually every aspect except torture. And she said, Feinstein said that Brennan was acting to protect the brotherhood of the CIA and that he wanted to destroy the report. And the Obama White House backed John Brennan. Now, he also has a deep history as the deputy executive director of the CIA when it was torturing people between 2001 and 2003. And he wriggles out of that by saying, well, you know, I wasn't really directly involved in any of that. But we know, and John Kiriakou, a friend of this program, said that Brennan was up to his neck in the torture program. And Kiriakou asked, how is it that one day he's a George W. Bush neocon, the next day he's a Barack Obama neoliberal? That is what a survivor John Brennan is. He's a chameleon. He can morph into anything. Marchetti adds here, including, it seems, into a wise elder statesman standing between democracy and dictatorship. And let's keep in mind, during the first Obama term, Brennan was the drone meister at the White House. He set up those Tuesday video conferences where they decided who was going to be killed next. And he falsely claimed that not a single collateral death had occurred. That was a comment he made in 2011 that was later proven to be a lie. And speaking of liars, we know that James Clapper lied under oath before the Senate Intelligence Committee, and Marchetti reveals to me here for the first time that Senator Ron Wyden, who asked the loaded question that Clapper lied to, well, Wyden had sent Clapper the question the day before. He knew it was coming. Clapper later said that he gave the least dishonest answer that he could. And Senator Wyden even gave Clapper an opportunity to revise his answer, to get it right. But Clapper declined. And there's much more in here about Mike Hayden, and I'll leave that when you click the link in the show file for today's podcast at peterbcollins.com. I've also linked to a brief comment from Ray McGovern, who served at the CIA and has been a very courageous whistleblower in the last 15 years. He writes that Trump's move is the second major sign that John Brennan is about to be hoisted on his own petard. And Ray speculates that documents now in the hands of congressional investigators showing Brennan's ringleader role in the so far unsuccessful attempts to derail Trump both before and after the 2016 election. And in a rare move, Ray McGovern quotes Rudy 9/11 Giuliani, who told Sean Hannity the other night, I'm going to tell you who orchestrated, who is the quarterback for all this. The guy running it is Brennan, and he should be in front of a grand jury. Brennan took a dossier that, unless he's the biggest idiot intelligence agent that ever lived, it's false. You can look at it and laugh at it. Now, here's the thing. I do not dismiss entirely the elements in the Steele dossier. The way it was manufactured, the way it was brought to the surface, there are serious questions about. And, of course, Rudy Giuliani is an opportunistic advocate here who will say anything to try to defend Donald Trump. But his central notion that John Brennan is the ringleader of Russiagate, I think, is deadly accurate. And, of course, the spooks circle the proverbial wagons to protect one of their own. Even Bobby Gates, the former Republican CIA director and defense boss, he came out of his cocoon to join 12 other former CIA directors and spooks who are testifying to John Brennan's unparalleled integrity. And Admiral McRaven said that Trump should take his security clearance too, saying that Brennan is a man whose honesty and character have never been in question except by those who don't know them. Well, I'm sorry, Admiral, that's bullshit. And I can smell it all the way here in California. Now, the New York Times has a strong editorial, was in Thursday's paper, criticizing Trump for using the official levers of government to punish critics and encourage other detractors to sit down and shut up. And it is a dangerous, dangerous precedent that has been set here. That on a whim, that because the president views you as some sort of an adversary or a threat to his survival, that he can make moves like this without any pretense or even any pretext. And when you hear Sarah Huck Sanders out there with this kind of total BS, that John Brennan had his security clearance revoked because of his erratic conduct and behavior and increasingly frenzied commentary. I mean, if that's the case, Trump doesn't qualify for a security clearance. And today, the Orange Comb-Over is threatening that his next revocation of a security clearance will be focused on Bruce Ohr, spelled O-H-R. He is a Justice Department official. His wife worked for Fusion GPS. And what I find laughable here is this New York Times article, which repeatedly describes Ohr as a target of conservative conspiracy theorists. Quote, Mr. Trump has embraced the conspiracy theory, casting Ohr and his wife Nellie as central players in what he calls the rigged witch hunt and accusing the couple of having what he claims are indirect contacts with Russians. Now, we need to know more about Bruce Ohr, about his wife Nellie, about what kind of back-channel communications were being conducted between Fusion GPS and the Justice Department and the FBI. Peter Strzok got fired while I was on vacation. And so, once again, I'm in this position where I do not support Trump's punitive behavior. And there is an argument being advanced by Rachel Maddow that all of the people on Trump's laundry list, his enemies list, are potential witnesses against him in some prospect of impeachment or other adjudication of the claims of Russian meddling in the 2016 election. And I'm prepared to see where investigations go. At this point, I don't know enough about Bruce Ohr and what role he may have played. But there are legitimate questions. They deserve to be asked, and they deserve to be answered. Well, my outspoken commentary, my skepticism about the Russiagate scandal, you're quite familiar with it, I suppose, if you're a regular listener here. Well, it has cost me a longtime listener and subscriber. And Mark Brodsky, who lives outside Chicago, started listening to me back in the 1970s when I was doing that late-night talk show on WDAI. And he wrote, Peter is a longtime supporter. It is with sadness that I let you know I've canceled my subscription. It seems that I no longer find myself listening to your podcasts. I feel you have either become extreme in your view of many topics, such as Russia cyber attacks and espionage, pragmatic solutions to difficult democratic issues, and issues with no short-term solutions. Kind of part of the purity police, a far cry from your Chicago radio days when I first listened to you. I'm a supporter of Bernie's philosophy of democratic socialism, so I'm liberal through and through. I certainly respect your opinions, even though I find myself disagreeing with you more than ever. I do wish you well and respect your standards for good journalism. So I responded to Mark in this manner. I said, first, I thank you for being a longtime subscriber, and I appreciate you letting me know why you're canceling. It's useful feedback for me. These are very challenging times with great political turbulence, and I understand that my views don't sit well with a range of people. I focus on facts and evidence and resist the urges from many quarters to embrace consensus views when I don't see evidence to support them. From all sides, I see strong pressures to conform to groupthink, which I find dangerous. For example, one is called a Putin stooge for being skeptical of the narrative advanced by the Democrats and spies like Brennan and Clapper, who I've never trusted. The purity police tag does rankle me, and I hear Norman Goldman use it often. It's a way of dodging the clear failures of the Democratic leadership, the superdelegates, and Clinton loyalists, and the sense of entitlement and inevitability they project. While it wasn't pleasant to predict that Trump would win, I saw it coming and took the risk to say so. The factors I cited, Republican suppression tactics, no one undecided about Hillary, and media malpractice, caused the Dems to lose, and party leaders remain clueless. I respect your disagreement and understand your decision. I hope you'll drop in once in a while to see what I'm up to. So, Mark, you are free to cancel your subscription. I never try to guilt trip people or anything like that. But I do believe that you're wrong in your characterization of my commentary. And I also do resent this purity police thing because it suggests that we really only have two choices and that we must conform to political orthodoxy as promoted by the two major parties. And that's something I will never accept. And while we're talking about subscribers, I want to thank a new subscriber who just took out an annual subscription, Brian Carey. He's got a CD on the way, his bonus gift, the new rock and roll CD by John Dist, and we'll be sending that along to him shortly. I also want to thank Andrew Harnack, Peter Hoffmeister, Jason Ferguson, and Janet Price, who are ongoing regular subscribers to the Peter B. Collins podcast. Well, while I was away, I was distressed to learn that my friend Peter Van Buren, the State Department whistleblower, has been permanently banned from Twitter. Now, you may know there's been a crackdown, and Alex Jones' InfoWars was bounced off YouTube, and Facebook, I believe, has suspended Alex Jones as well. But get this, Peter Van Buren was banned from Twitter because he made a comment to Jonathan Katz. Now, Jonathan Katz is a reporter who exposed wrongdoing in Haiti, and a man who I respect, or at least I did, until he took cheap shots at Peter Van Buren on Twitter. And the gist of their argument was about mainstream media's unwillingness to challenge the lies of our government. And so somebody, I don't know if it was Katz or someone else, complained to Twitter when Van Buren made a comment about it was a weird remark suggesting that a vampire in a MAGA hat might get in the face of Jonathan Katz. And that was treated as a threat of violence, which I find totally bizarre. So I got this note from Peter Van Buren. The suspension, the ban, permanent ban, followed exchanges with several mainstream journalists over their support for America's wars and unwillingness to challenge the lies of government. After 2 days of silence, Twitter sent me an auto response saying that what I wrote harasses, intimidates, or uses fear to silence someone else's voice. I don't think I did any of that, Van Buren continues, and I wish you didn't have to accept my word on it. I wish instead you could read what I wrote and decide for yourself, but Twitter won't allow that. Twitter says you cannot read and make up your own mind. They have, in fact, eliminated all the things I have ever written there over 7 years, disappearing me down the memory hole. That's what censorship does. It takes the power to decide what is right and wrong away from you and gives it to someone else. Hate what I write, hate me, block me, don't buy my books, but please don't celebrate handing over those choices to some company. I lost my career at the State Department because I spoke out as a whistleblower against the Iraq War. I've now been silenced again for speaking out, this time by a corporation. I am living in the America I always feared. Now, Alex Jones is being treated very differently by Twitter. They have announced he has a 1-week timeout so he can think about his next tweets. Now, I do not support the silencing of anyone, including the odious Alex Jones. And I freely admit that he traffics in things that are partially true and things that are flatly untrue. He's not a reliable source. But I leave it to the intelligence of the American public, such as it is, to determine whether they want to expose themselves to the thinking and the outbursts of Alex Jones or not. And I don't think that a tech company, which claims it's not a publisher, should exercise the power of censorship. So yes, I do support free speech for Alex Jones, and I support free speech for Peter Van Buren. Like many people, I was initially surprised that the legal team for Paul Manafort decided to rest the defense without calling any witnesses. They did cross-examine some of the prosecution witnesses and challenge the credibility of Rick Gates. But they are taking a big gamble that the jury is going to find that the prosecution did not convince them beyond a reasonable doubt of Manafort's guilt. And to me, it's overwhelming that he failed to report his income, that he used various deceptive ways to try to avoid paying taxes in the United States. Nevertheless, the jury sent questions to the judge after the first day of deliberation, asking for clarification on what is reasonable doubt and a couple of other issues. So it's anybody's guess how this first Manafort trial will come out. The second, which is due to start next month in Washington, D.C., is more directly related to his failure to register as a foreign agent. Again, from my perspective, that appears to be a very clear-cut case where Manafort is likely to be found guilty. But as this plays out, it's pretty clear that Manafort didn't mount a defense because he is expecting to be pardoned by President Trump in the event that he is convicted by this jury and by the subsequent one. And Trump makes no effort to rule that out. Today, he defended Manafort as a good person, declined to rule out a pardon, and this does lay out the prospect that they have a wink and a nod understanding that Manafort will not flip. He will absorb these convictions, and then Trump will pardon him. We'll see if that's how it actually plays out. Now, this is kind of interesting, at least from my perspective. Over the last, 6 to 9 months, ever since Trump floated this idea that he wanted a grand military parade in Washington, D.C., and then they wanted to schedule it for Veterans Day or the Veterans Day weekend this year, and there's no basis for this. We don't have a victory to celebrate. And it's just because he went to France and Macron treated him to a big French parade through the Champs-Élysées. And when the tab was estimated to cost $90 million and the Pentagon said we can't pull it together for this November, Trump announced that he's canceling the plans for the military parade, but he's blaming it on the people who run the government in Washington, D.C., because they projected that their part of the $90 million was about $21 million. And Trump's always looking for somebody to shift the blame to. And I'm just relieved that we're not going to have to put up with that crazy parade and the militant message that it sends. The Democratic Party is on the verge of doing something right. Although the optics aren't that great, Norman Solomon points out in a Huffington Post piece today that the Democratic National Committee scheduled a meeting in Chicago on the day before the 50th anniversary of the start of the party's most disastrous convention, the 1968 convention that gave us Hubert Humphrey. And Humphrey's nomination was fraught with the kind of backroom deal and rigging that many Sanders supporters saw in 2016. And Humphrey, who didn't even participate in the primaries, he didn't carry a single primary vote, he ended up with more than 2/3 of the delegates at the national convention, became the nominee, and lost to Nixon. Well, today or tomorrow, the DNC will be voting on a measure that's backed by the current chairman, Tom Perez, which would effectively eliminate the voting power of superdelegates on the first ballot at the 2020 convention. And this would go a long way to addressing the concerns of people who felt that it was fixed, it was rigged, that Hillary Clinton had sewn up so many of the superdelegate votes before Sanders even got his first primary win or even primary delegates. And that in the end, Sanders came very close to equaling Clinton in the so-called pledge delegate count, but the superdelegates were all committed to Hillary, and they wouldn't budge. And they dealt the Democratic Party its huge loss in 2016. You can try to blame Russia, you can try to blame all kinds of other people, but Democrats who have recently called the people who declined to vote for Hillary the purity police, The arrogance of that commentary, the arrogance of that blame shifting is really, really breathtaking. And while I was away, the Democratic National Committee did something I strongly disapprove of. Tom Perez led an effort to undermine some policies that were adopted just a few months ago to ban the acceptance of political contributions from political action committees related to fossil fuel companies, even labor PACs. And they rewrote the rules. The DNC gratefully acknowledges and will continue to welcome the long-standing and generous contributions of workers, including those in energy and related industries. And here's a case where my friend Christine Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's daughter, led the charge in the right direction. She had a resolution to remove the words employers' political action committees from this resolution, and it was voted down 28-4. And Pelosi said that DNC staff and officers never consulted me on language to reverse my resolution banning corporate fossil fuel PAC money, and now said that they have to keep the resolution as is because of all the work we did. Well, Molly Kelly, Democratic candidate for governor in New Hampshire, issued a statement against the resolution. The DNC is wrong. The harmful effects of climate change are apparent on an almost daily basis. Those of us who care deeply about protecting our environment should not fund our campaigns with donations from one of the biggest contributors of climate change, the fossil fuel industry. And Bill McKibben, founder of 350.org, says the issue goes beyond donations. At least as drafted, this proposal also recommits the party to an all-of-the-above energy stance, which was taken out of the platform in 2016 after a lot of hard work. Well, the Catholic Church continues to reel over sex crimes and cover-ups that lead to the very highest ranks. The report out of Pennsylvania that shows that 300 priests molested more than 1,000 children over a 60-year period is devastating. Not only that, the exposure of former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. He was the Archbishop of Washington. He was the front man for the Catholic bishops as they said they were going to fix the problem and deal with the offenders. Well, he's been exposed as a man who forced seminarians to have sex with him, and that it happened over a long period of time. So the Vatican is receiving a request from the Catholic bishops for an investigation. But I really don't see much need for further investigation unless they're really going to refer the violations for criminal prosecution, as we saw in Australia a few months ago. And one of the leaders of the Vatican cover-up is the former Pope, the retired Pope, who sleeps in the fancy accommodations at the Vatican while the current Pope Francis sleeps on a cot. And he, of course, was Joseph Ratzinger, who led the cover-up from the Vatican's Office of Inquisition. It has a different name, but that's what I call it. And, they're not going to hold him responsible for what occurred. But this is a devastating problem in the Catholic Church, and it's one of the major reasons that your humble host describes himself as a former Catholic. New statistics out from the Centers for Disease Control show that 72,000 people died by drug overdose in the United States last year. A majority of those, 49,000, were caused by opioids, and almost half of those, 29,000, that's more than half, were killed by fentanyl, the synthetic opioid that is a major street drug. The highest death rates came in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And we are not doing, we're doing almost nothing to address it. There are legal cases moving through the courts, but Obama failed. Trump continues to fail. There is no leadership except empty talk of criminal penalties for drug abusers. And we know that that kind of prohibition doesn't work. I want to thank the people who made my vacation special. We traveled to Maine, and during my first week, we had a great dinner in Belfast, Maine, hosted by Abby and Mike McMillan, along with their friends Rob Shetterly and Gail Page. I plan to interview Rob about his important work. He paints portraits of people who push for peace and for change. And probably in September sometime, you'll hear a podcast with him. I also want to thank Del Leonard, who's been my long-running vice president for marketing in New England. We met for lunch, a long lunch, in Kittery, Maine, which is just across the bridge from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and had a great time catching up, talking politics, talking about the podcast, and I really appreciate Del's support. Also, our friends Mary Gale and Paul Sycamore hosted us for a couple of nights in southern Maine, and we had a great time. Paul is a guy who really is very well informed and has some strong opinions, some of which match mine. And we also spent a week at Cape Cod with the extended family of mine and caught up with some of the younger relatives who I've never met, and also was able to reconnect with some of my cousins who I haven't seen in as long as 20 years. So it was a great vacation. I'm glad to be back, and I have to tell you that the plans to remodel the secret studio have been pushed back. So I'll have a couple of podcasts for you next week, and then we'll be taking a break again until after Labor Day. And I am sorry for the interruptions, but that's how it goes. Thanks for listening to this daily news and comment podcast. You'll find it on YouTube, and you're invited to share it with absolutely everyone. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.